last April, I was talking with a successful lobsterman from Sorrento on his boat. And he said, you know, when this project was first announced, none of the fishermen thought it would go anywhere because of Acadia. And as we now know, more than a year later, this company is persisting, and Acadia National Park continues to be, and its proximity to Acadia National Park continues to be one of the major issues in our opposition efforts. I can't think of three better people to talk about the relationship of this project to Acadia than John Kelly, David McDonald, and Lauren Cosgrove. I'm going to introduce them each individually. They're going to give each going to give brief presentations, and then we'll open it up to your questions and comments. John Kelly from the Park Service is going to go first. Now, we know the Park Service as a government agency cannot take an official position on this, but I think we have all seen the comments that John and Kevin Snyder, the park superintendent, have made in expressing their concerns about this. They have been very forceful, and they've made a very strong case that this development is not compatible with Acadia. John has been with the Park Service for more than 21 years. He started at Acadia National Park in 2000 as the park planner, served in that role for 15 years, and in 2015 became management assistant. Now that's a rather innocuous sounding title, but from what I know, John, I think you're involved in just about everything that happens in Acadia National Park. So we're very pleased to have you with us today, and I'll turn it over to you right now.
Thanks very much. And I'm maybe not involved in everything, but a lot of things. And in particular, things that happen outside the park that have potential impact the resources and values of Acadia. I guess I want to first say, Ted, that the National Park Service can and will take a position and stand on projects like this that haven't impacted the park. So I just want to clarify that we very much can take a position, not based on emotions or sort of those types of feelings, but on scientific facts and information that we have from our experiencing managing the park and understanding what visitors are coming here to enjoy. So just with our limited time, I want to first say that I'd like to describe our approach to addressing this proposal rather than trying to go into details about each of the specific impacts. Certainly not enough time to cover everything in that regard. So I want to start also by pointing out the obvious, the significance of Acadia National Park, not only to the communities, but to our nation. So the park protects nationally significant natural and cultural resources, along with, as you know, spectacular scenery and views from and to the park, and offers endless opportunities for recreating and learning. And while it's not a mission of the National Park Service, taking 2019's visitation of 3.4 million, visitors to Acadia contributed $511 million to the local economy and supported 5,500 jobs. And those were 2019 numbers. As you probably have heard, visitation in 2021 has exceeded 4 million. So those figures will be much higher when the new report is released. And I want to now just share a map. I only have one slide to share. Again, too much to cover in just a few minutes. But you should be seeing a map, compliments of Maine Coast Heritage Trust. This shows all the protected lands in a relatively close area to the two proposed leased areas. So the dark green, just to give you some perspective, the dark green is Acadia National Park. This grayish or opaque green are conservation easements held by Acadia. So we protect, not with public access, but we protect the natural, cultural, and scenic resources of Ironbound here, Jordan Island, and Preble, all basically encircling these lease areas. For perspective, the aptly named Long Porcupine lease area is only 2,000 feet from the national park, which, as you mentioned, in itself should be enough a concern for everyone. I also want to point out, it's really important to know that the National Park Service does not have authority, does not have jurisdiction to control anything that happens outside of those boundaries. We do, however, have very specific policies that allow us to do what we're doing in this case. And specifically, the management policies say that we are to use all available tools to protect park resources and values from unacceptable impacts. We're supposed to monitor changes to adjacent lands and waters and external activities for their potential impacts on park resources and values. And then finally, we're encouraged by these policies to encourage compatible adjacent uses and seek to avoid and mitigate potential adverse effects on park resources and values by actively participating in the regulatory processes of federal, state, and local governments having jurisdiction over the property affecting the park. So I'm going to stop sharing and get back to the screen. So we are, fully engaged in that respect, even though we don't have that jurisdiction or authority outside of our boundary. But we definitely, like any other abutter, have a right and a responsibility to protect the resources and values of the park. So, as you know, Acadia is intertwined with many, many communities on many islands across the coastal shore and on Scudic. So there are activities that happen all the time, and we do comment on them. We can't comment on things going on at the Jackson Lab all the time. We comment on wind turbines, cell towers, development. So it's not unusual for us to be involved in this way. But we're not concerned about everything that happens outside of the park, because it is often fitting within the historic use or within the landscape, or sort of in scale with what has gone on for dozens of years in compatibility with the park. In this case, as we know, we are very concerned because of the type, the scale, and the location of this development. And we have to look at it as a development, just like it would be on the land. And you have to look at where it is. If we had an area of land that was undeveloped like Frenchman Bay, and we were to build an industrial center in the middle of it, that would be egregious because of the discontinuity between what is there and what is proposed. That doesn't happen around Acadia very much. The other issue is that the cumulative effects of the proposal are the big concern, not just the lease areas, but the vessels traveling to and from Prospect Harbor, and the land development at Prospect Harbor. We have a very big interest in what happens on the Scudic Peninsula because the park is present there as well. The other concern about this proposal is the precedent that it sets, and the potential. We're thinking this may be the worst case scenario, but if this is approved, it opens the door for expansion. So it may not be just what we're dealing with in terms of 120 acres of leased area. It could grow. So all of these impacts are overall impacts. Specifically, the park is looking at scenic views, impacts on the night sky, historic properties, the soundscape, intertidal ecosystem, and of course, water and air quality. And to look at all those complex issues, we have engaged not only park staff, but subject matter experts from our regional and Washington offices. And they're helping us with the identification and the assessment of these impacts on these resources. So as you know, we have already expressed our concerns in letters to the DMR in July and the DEP last October. And we'll continue to work with the state and local review processes. And we're in particular looking towards the Army Corps of Engineers involvement with this in terms of permitting under Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, because that triggers then the review, the broader environmental review under the National Environmental Policy Act. And this is where the National Park Service and others will have an opportunity to address not the specific criteria that DEP and DMR have, but really any impact to the human environment, including scenery and sound, and so those more ephemeral concerns that we really know are some of the biggest concerns about this project. So I'll end there. I'll pass it back to Ted and of course be available for questions during the session. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I really, really appreciate that. And it's so good to hear all the things that you're doing and that the park indeed can and will take a position on this development. Our next speaker is David McDonald, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Friends of Acadia. Before joining Friends of Acadia in 2012, David spent 20 years in land conservation with the Maine Coast Heritage Trust. Friends of Acadia has grown in many ways under his leadership, and sad to say, David is moving on, I think, in sometime in the next few months. And if we were all together in a big room, David, I think this is the point where everybody would stand up and give you a standing ovation for all that you have done. So we'll try to do it virtually, but thank you for all your good work, and thank you for being such a valuable and committed ally in this fight. It's been great working with you, and we look forward to working with your successor, and we hope that we can count on you to stay involved.
You bet. Thank you so much, Ted. And this is a great gathering tonight. We appreciate all the work that Frenchman Bay United's been doing to raise awareness, and we're glad to be part of the conversation tonight. I also want to just acknowledge the great work of my two fellow panelists here tonight. John, great job on the overview. And, you know, the Park Service is our primary partner, and we're much more effective when we're in step with the Park Service. And I appreciate the forceful way in which the Park Service has spoken out on this. Likewise, Lauren, National Parks Conservation Association is just a really powerful ally for us on a number of causes. You know, having an organization down in Washington that's got the wisdom and the national perspective really helps compound and extend our reach. So I'm honored to be alongside these two. So most of you know, Friends of Acadia is a nonprofit organization. We're a private group. We're independent from the park, but we work closely with them. We were founded almost 40 years ago by a group of private citizens who really believed that the park would benefit from a supporting organization that would help channel people's love for this park into action. So our mission is pretty simple. It's to preserve and protect and promote stewardship of the outstanding natural and cultural values of Acadia National Park and the surrounding communities for the enjoyment of current and future generations. Unlike a lot of friends groups around the country that really focus on philanthropy and fundraising, and we do a lot of that, we also have a long history and tradition of being advocates for the park when necessary. We're usually advocating for something, which is easier. You know, we advocate for federal funding for the park. We advocated for the transportation plan that the park's been working on for the last few years. But we are not hesitant to advocate against something when we view it as a threat. Probably the best example of that in recent years was the work we did for many, many years on some of the controversial proposals for the Scudic Peninsula, clear cuts, development. You know, that eventually turned into a positive development once it got into friendly conservation hands and eventually became part of the park. But for many, many years, that was a fight like this one, and Friends of Acadia was very active in that. So I'm lucky enough to be part of the staff. We've got a terrific board that provides governance and leadership. Our membership is almost 5,000 folks from all around the state, all around the country. And those members include individuals, families, businesses. You know, it's a really diverse membership. And we've heard from the members about this proposal. And as we've written about it in our journal, as we've penned some op-eds, we've really gotten a lot of support and reinforcement from our membership across the board. We are a nonpartisan organization. We have some of the most conservative folks you'll ever see on the political spectrum, and we also have very left-leaning folks. And one of the things I love about the work is these diverging political views really come together around parks. And so I want to make a real strong point about, you know, Maine's congressional delegation, again, runs the gamut in terms of where they stand politically. They've all been terrific advocates for the park, and our membership is the same. We recognize that we are one of many stakeholders around the Bay. that have been, focused on this project. We're primarily focused on park values, but we've really see the value in coming together with other stakeholders who might have a different lens, be it the fishermen, other smaller aquaculture sites, other organizations that have a different mission or a different perspective. And for that reason, we've been really appreciative of the role Frenchman Bay United has played. We are a member of Frenchman Bay United. We made a grant recently to help them with their important work, particularly the modeling and the need for that to continue. Like John and the Park Service, we've registered our concerns in writing with the applicant, with the DEP, with the DMR. I want to particularly thank Stephanie Clement, our conservation director, who is traveling this week and not able to be part of this forum tonight, but she's really been leading the charge for us in terms of the careful review and our comments in terms of how we see the proposal affecting the park and affecting our mission. And I would just underscore what John Kelly said earlier, that the park values affected are so much more than the scenic views from Cadillac Mountain. I know that's a convenient example that people hold up. The press tends to hold that up. The applicant, I know, has stressed that and sort of tried to downplay that. But the air quality, the water quality, the night sky, the wildlife, the soundscapes, all that would be so seriously impacted are every bit as important as that view from Cadillac Mountain. So I just want to underscore that this is a many-pronged concern we have. It's also important to remind folks that Acadia is not just a chunk of land on Mount Desert Island. It's an archipelago with dozens of islands between Schoodic and Penobscot Bay that are in park ownership, hundreds of islands that are subject to the conservation easements that John described. And together, this effort that the park, landowners, Maine Coast Heritage Trust, Frenchman Bay Conservancy, the Nature Conservancy, this has been a remarkable commitment toward this shared resource. And in our letters to the agencies, we've really underscored the significance of that commitment that's been made by many, many others, Park Service and others beyond them, and the obligation to protect the values, both the land and water values that Acadia's founders envisioned and that Congress envisioned when they passed the boundary legislation in 1986. That was a federal act of Congress. And even though John's right, it doesn't give regulatory jurisdiction to the park, it speaks about the relationship to these lands and waters. So all of that is important. That'll be part of the argument we continue to make. And I guess the last thing I'd say is at FOA, Friends of Acadia, we spend a lot of time talking with the park about visitor experience. John mentioned the great numbers of visits and visitors that we're seeing in recent years. We're really trying to preserve the quality of people's visitor experience to the park. And again, just like the scenery or the wildlife, that visitor experience is a value that we need to pay attention to. And it may be obvious, but it's important to state it. There is no single Acadia experience. It's not Cadillac Mountain. It's not Thunder Hole. People experience the park in a variety of ways. And let me tell you, Frenchman Bay is a big part of that. Folks who are out kayaking, they may be on a windjammer, they might be on a nature cruise, they might be hiking out to Bar Island, you name it. Thousands and thousands of people have their Acadia moment in Frenchman Bay. And this proposal would significantly impact the way that people see Acadia, experience it, smell it, hear it. Putting a proposal of this scale in this location would really change the Acadia experience, in addition to all the impacts on those natural resources and values that John spoke of. So I'm going to wrap it up there to leave room for questions. And for Lauren, Friends of Acadia looks forward to doing all we can to support the Park Service on this one, and as well as the partnership, FBU, and many, many others. As Lauren will detail, the park can't always, even though they can come out in opposition, there's things that nonprofit organization and individuals can do to give voice to our concerns that are really important. So I'd encourage all of you to stay engaged and let me know how Friends of Acadia can help. So back to you, Ted, and of course, I'll stand by for questions when it comes to that.
Thank you. When we first started organizing to oppose this, we reached out to many different groups. And one that I reached out to was the National Parks Conservation Association, which I'm embarrassed to say is a group I never heard of, even though they've been around for more than 100 years. But we quickly got a response from Lauren Cosgrove, their senior program manager in their Northeast region. But Lauren quickly responded, and she has become a very valuable ally in this fight. She has been to Maine many times. She's been to many of our meetings. She's been out on the bay to see the Penn sites, and it is great to have her and the weight of the National Parks Conservation Association behind us in this effort. So, Lauren, I think you got a few slides from us for us, and we'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. And thank you everybody for inviting me today. Let's see if I can get this going. Are you guys seeing a slide full screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hopefully this is also that I'm not just a talking head. Thanks for the time. I'm Lauren Cosgrove. I'm with NPCA. I want to just give you a little bit of background. If you've never heard of us before, Ted, no worries. We get that all the time. So I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed. We are a independent 501c3 not-for-profit organization. So we're a member-based group, and like David was explaining, we're separate from the government. We don't accept tax dollars. We are not federal employees, and it's always important for me to make that distinction when I talk about what our mission is, because there's a little bit more that we can do as the primary advocate for our national parks. Established over 100 years ago, working with our partners and our members to protect and preserve our national parks for future generations. We raise our voices and empower others to stand up and speak out for America's favorite places. We do this by hosting advocacy workshops and by calling on our members and advocates to get involved in projects just like the salmon farm. We work in all 50 states and on Capitol Hill to make sure that decision makers know how important our national parks are, what the challenges are that they face, and what they can do to protect them. And as Ted mentioned, I work in NPCA's Northeast region, where we work to protect 49 national parks in New England, New York, and New Jersey. NPCA has just under 2,600 members in the state of Maine, all of which who have been receiving alerts about the salmon farm and ways that they can push back. And we also have 2 staff members who actually moved back to their home state of Maine during the pandemic, one in our government affairs department and one in our legal department, both of whom are working with us on this campaign. So before I get into the specifics of what we've been doing to push back, I just want to acknowledge some of the great work that the Frenchman Bay United Coalition has been doing, mirroring many of the tactics that NPCA has when we get involved and advocate for the greatest protections for our parks. And the first is to emphasize the number of visitors that come from around the world to Acadia National Park for that once-in-a-lifetime experience. As was mentioned earlier, last year was a record-breaking year. Over 4 million people came to Acadia, and it remains one of the top 10 most visited sites in the entire national park system. And from my experience as working as a campaigner for the last 8 years, I'll tell you that visitation numbers are compelling to decision makers. We used these stats when we advocated for the Great American Outdoors Act, which brought 27 million to Acadia to address deferred maintenance. We use these facts when advocating for the transportation plan and the resources needed to implement the plan. And the salmon farm is no different. So I want to applaud FBU for keeping this point front and center. Decision makers need to know that a record-breaking 4 million people came to Maine to visit Acadia. And it'll help apply pressure on them to do the right thing and to not risk permitting any project that could potentially spoil this incredible resource. It's also important that decision makers know Acadia supports a healthy economy. Again, as was previously mentioned, Acadia generates more than $300 million in visitor spending and an additional $207 million in economic output from secondary effects back in 2022. And if you're not aware, I want to highlight the link that's at the bottom of this slide, and we'll be sure to send these slides to you all. This is a great resource that you can use when making that economic argument, which is compelling to agency officials about how national parks can support and drive local economies. Another point I want to emphasize is Acadia's Class 1 air quality status. Now, air impacts was mentioned as an area of concern from the salmon farm, but this should also be another point that's front and center in your campaign. The EPA designated Acadia as a Class 1 area, which means it has some of the strongest air protections in the country mandated by the Clean Air Act. There are actually 4 Class 1 areas in Maine, Acadia, which is one of. And the pie chart on my slide shows the industrial sectors that are emitting the most visibility impairing pollution in Maine right now. But as we know, the salmon farm is designed to run on diesel fuel, a carbon pollution source that would put human health and Acadia's Class 1 air quality at risk. Our partners at the Frenchman Bay Conservancy crunched some numbers. The proposed operations fueled by 10 500 kilowatt diesel generators operating 90% of the time is estimated to produce 62 million pounds of carbon dioxide every year. And so decision makers need to be reminded that Acadia is a Class 1 area and that the air quality cannot be sacrificed for the salmon farm. Again, I want to just reference the link on the bottom of my slide there. NPCA has an expert air team that's been working to protect Class 1 areas for over a decade, and there's some great resources that you might find useful on that webpage. So in taking steps to fight back on the salmon farm, we created a website and we've got a fact sheet, and we've used these resources to convey the problem that this operation would have in meetings with Senator King's staff, Representative Golden's staff, and Representative Pingree herself. Like our partners, we've sent letters to the DMR, to the Army Corps during scoping session. We requested that the DEP host public hearings. We provided oral comment at that public meeting last October. We've signed support letters from some of our partners, and we've called on our 2,600 members in Maine to speak up, many of whom submitted comments last summer. In all of these communications, we've been emphasizing the concerns that you've heard already tonight, that you know deep to your heart. So I don't want to waste time emphasizing them, but really talking about how this project is different than what already exists in the Bay. The size and type of development is what makes this so different. The precedents that it would set and the cumulative impact that it could have on the park and surrounding communities is where we've tried to emphasize. And so over the course of the spring, NPCA is going to be working to focus our advocacy on the federal permitting issues that are involved in the project. This is where we're most familiar. And the federal permit that's required here is the Section 10 permit under the Rivers and Harbors Act. And it's generally required for the installation of structures within navigable waters. And we understand that the proposed pens and associated barges are going to be considered structures, and that's what triggers the Section 10 permit. And to our knowledge, the federal process has not begun yet, and a decision on an EIS from the Army Corps is still pending. The other federal hook here is Clean Water Act, Section 402, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And the state of Maine has been delegated the authority to issue permits for discharges into navigable waters under Section 402 of the Clean Water Act. And so this is the DEP waste discharge permit that you all know about. And so we'll be making sure that there's proper federal oversight of that permitting decision and getting involved in any advocacy capacity that we can. So that's sort of the end of my slides. We'll make sure that you get them so those links can potentially be helpful. And I want to just kick it back to you because I'm sure there's some really great questions from the audience, and thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to all of our panelists. What a great group to have. Acadia is so special to every one of us at this meeting tonight, and it's great to know that we have such strong advocates. And from FBU's standpoint, it's great to have such hardworking partners with us in this fight to stop this project. I think the best way is to use the raised hand function at the bottom of your screen under reactions. You'll see it, and if you raise your hand, I think with Jerry's help, we'll go through and take your questions to any or all of our panelists.
Absolutely. We do have a few comments and questions in the chat. I'll just ask those of you while folks are raising their hand. But, we know that our colleagues and the residents of Gouldsboro are really at sort of ground zero for this initiative. And so kudos to the Friends of Schoodic Peninsula, who I think have really done a terrific job of raising awareness of this issue. But one question in the chat asks whether or not our presenters this evening might be willing to make a presentation to the Gouldsboro Board of Selectmen. And I have to say, it would be pretty compelling, and I think something that we should consider. So I just wanted to reiterate that question and give that to all of you for some additional thought, because I think together the three of you really provide an incredibly valuable perspective, and one that should be heard widely. Let's see, we have some comments about economic impact. Those of you that are following in the chat, I think those links that Lauren provided and John as well are really, really important. So Andy, I see that you have your hand raised. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, that would be great.
I'm with my partner, Randy Spivak, who also wants to ask a question. So my question for the Park Service first is, are the islands that you have conservation easements on, are those considered part of the national park?
The simple answer is very much yes.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, conservation easements are a legal land interest. They are not the same as what is called fee interest, where you basically own all the rights and access to the land. Conservation easements are, in the end, all individually negotiated with the landowners, but we have at a minimum the ability to preserve the natural, cultural, and scenic resources of those islands.
Thanks. And have you taken, in particular for the non-degradation standard under the Class 1 airshed classification under the Clean Air Act, has the Park Service taken air quality measurements or collected other data on the nearby islands, both held in fee and or conservation easements?
We monitor air quality every day. We don't have stations specific on the islands, but we do have air monitoring stations on the top of Cadillac and on the slope of McFarland Hill near park headquarters, which would be the nearest to Frenchman Bay. And we work with state DEP on that air monitoring. So there's a long history, daily data on air quality.
Thanks. Is the DEP delegated under the Clean Air Act to administer it for Maine? Is that the main agency?
That's true.
And has the applicants made an application for an air quality pollution permit to DEP? Does anybody know?
Not to my knowledge. And the question is whether it triggers a permit application or not. So there's a question there for sure.
Because it's not polluting enough?
I don't know the technical thresholds, but they have to reach a threshold potential to require a permit. But that's certainly an area of concern.
But regardless of that threshold, if the Park Service finds that the air quality is being impaired from a Class 1 protective standpoint, you have an obligation to push that issue.
Yes.
Under your Organic Act and the Clean Air Act, et cetera.
The challenge, as you can imagine, is to identify that as the source and the the trigger that's causing
Right.
thresholds to be exceeded.
Especially prospectively identify it. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Hey, thanks, Lauren, for your presentation and everyone who just presented. What was the reaction of the main delegation, and will they weigh in on this issue?
It's a great question. They were very much interested in seeing how the state process played out. They want to learn more. They were interested in getting more information from us, and so we've been due diligent in sharing, comment letters, public meeting information with staff, and it's been successful. We've seen their staff members participating. I think that there may be some initial concerns, but given that this is a state-led process, they're going to let the state process play out.
But yet the Army Corps permits are federal permits. And so, in fact, sorry to be cynical here, but yeah, that's the typical delegation response. Oh yeah, we'll just let the state blah, 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 in the words of Greta Thunberg. But frankly, there's also federal permits to be issued. And so they actually can weigh in. I know you know that.
Yes, and to our understanding, the Army Corps hasn't actually received anything yet. And so, that's sort of our next step is waiting for the Corps to actually receive paperwork and start that process. And only then will we, bring back in our federal electeds to let them know that's back at the plate. Yeah, David, I see you got a hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I've been encouraged actually that the offices are paying attention to this. We've been up on Cadillac. They are following it. And so when the opportunity arises, which I think you're right, the Army Corps is the opportunity, I think they're going to be in our court. And I would also add that a few of us did have the chance to spend time with Secretary Holland when she was here in June out on the Bay, and her Undersecretary Shannon Estenos.
Yep.
They are well aware of what's going on, and kudos again to the Park Service for arranging the time to make sure we had a chance to describe this project and its negative impacts on the park.
Great, thanks. Nice orchestration there to have Howland engaged. And just one last question, sorry to take up so much airtime, but are these permits, they're not sequential, are they? In other words, the applications to the Army Corps for the NPDES can proceed while the state main DEP is going on? There's no sequential thing here. Do I have that right?
Oh, but for the Army Corps of Engineers will not begin their process until the state DMR finds applications complete. And then, it is a separate independent process.
Okay, and that's on hold now, right? The state process?
Correct.
Okay, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks to you for your questions. Those were great. For those of you that are following along in the chat, there are some additional comments and questions. So Lynn makes a really important point about the issue of potentially developing a stewardship plan or a harvest plan for the Bay. She puts her contact information there in the chat for anyone who might be interested in discussing that. And I think, in line with this conversation about the congressional delegation and the regulatory process, I would just remind everyone that this is an essential part of addressing this issue over the long term. So we will certainly be looking to our conservation partners who have a lot of experience with these kinds of things to potentially guide us as we work to really make sure that we are sort of simultaneously thinking about longer term issues than simply the American Aquafarms proposal, although that alone is enormous enough to take everyone's bandwidth, but we do recognize that there is a much longer term issue here. One additional question back to air quality is a question about air quality impairment, and is the air quality impairment worse than cruise ships in Bar Harbor? Just curious about the comparison there.
I'm not sure what the question is, Jerry, but I don't know of any study that has compared or even been able to measure, isolate cruise ship impacts from other air quality impacts.
Okay. All right. Just a quick, there's lots of questions here, so I'm just going to try to pull some of these out, but let's see. Can a seasonal Gouldsboro resident participate electronically in the Gouldsboro Planning Board? I'm just going to throw that out to the audience because I don't know the answer to that. So looks like some have.
Yeah, they absolutely can, Sherry.
Okay.
We announce the meetings ahead of they meet every 2 weeks. We put something out to our mailing list and anyone can call in. Everything's on Zoom. They're all hybrid meetings. You can either show up in person or show up on Zoom.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate that. Lauren, I actually have a question for you. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot and I apologize for that in advance. But as you sort of look at the campaign that FBU and this larger group have put together, are there key areas where you see that maybe we're missing an opportunity? Or, if you sort of were in charge and you had unlimited budget, what would your recommendation be to this group in terms of how to really be more effective in raising awareness and potentially opposing this project?
Well, I'll tell you, in my years of experience at NPCA, I have never seen quite an organized and well motivated and enthusiastic coalition that you all have created at Frenchman Bay United. I don't know if it's just the specialty of Acadia National Park and Frenchman Bay, if it's just an attribute to how passionate you all are as residents and the deep connection that you have to the lands and waters that you live, but you all have done an amazing job. And like I said, I've never seen such a well-organized coalition to fight back on a project. So you're leaps and bounds ahead of anything I've ever seen. You've got a lot of the bells and whistles. I think that you've got some great visuals. You've got an amazing team doing the analyses. The modeling that you've been able to move forward and the way that you've been able to get DEP's attention on that, I think is really, really strong. I think the investments that you're making to continue that effort forward are strategic, and I would encourage you to continue to do that. And the other component of advocacy campaigns that NPCA does a lot is keeping that drumbeat going. When trying to connect with decision makers, making sure that your community members are front and center, that you give folks, the members of your organization, the microphone, and you find ways for everyone to be connecting with not just the agencies, but the elected officials. And so whether that be a letter writing campaign or like the flotilla rally that you had last summer, these were all really great engagement opportunities. And I would just continue to encourage you to think about ramping those up. Plans for this summer, when it's safe to gather outside. The power that you have is that you had 155 people on this call. And I've never seen that. And you all are coming together on the same side. And that I think is unique.
That's great. Thank you very much. Some days it feels a little bit like sucking mud through a straw, but it's really nice of you to say. And thanks to all of you for that continued support. I think Lauren's absolutely right. We are just thrilled that all of you came out this evening to hear these comments. And it's incredibly reassuring for all of us to know that there is this groundswell of support behind this effort. So thanks to all of you. Let's see, a couple more questions in the chat here. Let's see, we have a question. Is it possible to quickly retrieve the Federal Act numbers, identifiers, and an executive summary, like a sentence for the relevance of these acts to the opposition effort? It would be great to have the specifics for use in correspondence. So I'm sure that's something we can pull together and put on our website. I did just include a link to the Frenchman Bay United website. There are a lot of resources there. It is something that we've recently just invested some resources in to improve that website. So be looking for some of those improvements and our ability to be more of a resource to all of you to make sure that you have the information and the resources that you need to be effective. Let's see, could Lauren's association organize a social media campaign from its nationwide constituency?
Social media is a very powerful tool, and we've got folks from all over the country following our accounts. And yes, we can definitely dial up our bandwidth on social media to raise this campaign. We want to see what kind of targeting we can do. We've got some super advocates, and we can target some posts by zip code. So we might want to look at some of those tools. And Frenchman Bay United, I might lean on you guys to figure out what the hook is. We'd want to either promote event, a comment period, an action that folks can take. So we'd want to time it appropriately. But I'd agree with you. I think social media is a great tool to use, and we can definitely see what our channels can do to help promote the great work that y'all are doing.
And I think that's great. There are a lot of comments in the chat about ways to sort of connect and to collaborate on these issues. I think social media is probably a great platform for that. I know FBU has really been focused on kind of the three major platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we certainly are open to hearing from all of you about what platforms you find particularly effective and useful, and we're kind of learning as we go, but we are willing to wade in if there is a particular platform that you think would be helpful. We have a couple of additional questions here. Are the regulations that the DMR must use to evaluate this project sufficient to rule? Sorry, my chat's moving so quickly, I can't keep track here. Here we go. Are they sufficient to rule on a project of this scale? Is it of a scale much greater than any of the owner-operated aquaculture farms on our Maine coast? I'm not sure who's best to field that one. Any comments? Crystal, Canny, I know you're out there somewhere. Somehow this one has you written all over it.
You're very kind, Jerry. No, the rules and regulations are absolutely not sufficient to deal with something of this size. As some of you may know, there was 116,000 fish that died not from that far from Frenchman Bay this summer in salmon pens. And the rules and regulations were so poor that were in place. They're only monitoring for sulfides. They didn't have any reporting requirements. So, it takes me back to the three things that I talk about a lot for Protect Maine's Fishing Heritage Foundation, which is the rules and regulations are inadequate and have set the table for exactly why we are where we are right now. You can hold lease, up to 1,000 acres of leases. You can hold them for 20 years. You can transfer them without a public hearing. And our waters are inexpensive, not for our small owner-operator aquaculturists, which are a really good thing for the state, but for large corporations. It's $100 an acre. Where could you lease that on land? For what kind of land could you lease for $100 an acre? So in the case of Frenchman Bay, that's just $12,000 a year, and they stand to make millions. I hope I answered that.
You did. So again, just seeing some comments in the chat about ways to connect about this, the letter writing campaign. I would just say, I'm sure many of you have noticed recently that American Aquafarms has definitely ramped up its PR game. So we've seen some full page ads in many of the local newspapers. We've seen the launch of what they are calling community conversations. And I have to say, as an aside, I think we've shown them this evening exactly what a community conversation really looks like. And it's not a canned video recording from your lawyer's office. I think the idea that we have members of the community who are here able to ask their questions live, able to get the information that they need to the extent that we can provide it, is a wonderful example of exactly what a community, what community involvement looks like. So I just commend all of you again for being here, for letting your voice be heard, and for giving us the impetus and the energy that we need to continue this fight. I can't let the comment in the chat go about fundraising needs without responding to it. So thank you, Nancy, for asking that. As many of you know, at our last meeting, we talked about where we were with our fundraising, the idea that we had sort of set a $500,000 goal for ourselves as this initial phase. I'm happy to say that we are making tremendous progress. Thanks to all of you. I mean, I see so many faces on this call this evening that have given so generously. And I just want to say thank you, because without you, we would not be able to do any of this. Currently, our legal fees are running somewhere in the neighborhood of about an average of $15,000 a month. Our communications efforts are an existing expense that we are hoping to ramp up over the next few weeks and months. And so we've raised about $340,000 toward that goal of 500,000. So we have a long way to go. And the challenge, of course, with this campaign or this effort is we don't really know what the total cost is going to be. We don't exactly know how this is going to go. We know it's going to be a long fight, and we know that we're going to need continued support from this amazing community. So I would say if you have the ability to continue to make a contribution, again, that website that's in the chat, FrenchmanBayUnited.org, you can give online, you can send, there's information there on where to send your check. And we just, again, are incredibly grateful to all of you for all that you have done to move this project forward. So with that, Ted, I'm going to turn it back to you. I think we've covered kind of the basic themes in these questions. So.
Great. I see one more question. Should we write the governor or DMR? You should write both. You should write your local legislators. You should write the congressional delegation. Don't underestimate the power of a letter. When your letter is combined with my letter and Jerry's and Henry's and everybody else's, it does make a difference. So please write early and often. Again, I just want to say thank you to this great panel tonight, John Kelly, David McDonald, Lauren Cosgrove. We are so lucky to have you in this fight and working so hard to protect the Acadia that we all love. We are going to defeat this project, but we're not going to stop there. We have to keep going and make sure that something like this never happens again. So thank you for being part of this. Thanks for this turnout. And again, please let us know if there are other topics that you would like us to tackle in the coming months, and as we put on these monthly information sessions for our members. So again, thank you to our panel. Thank you to all of you.